So following up on the last video, we're making use of DNA Web for setting up our web environment. So if you haven't already, just download the DNA Web installer on dnaweb.io and install that. And then it's nice and simple now. You just make a new folder for your project if you don't already. So responsive, we'll call this one. And then in the folder that you are working in, just type DNA Web into the address bar and it will spin up DNA Web. And now we will make a new blank template. So just take new template blank and press enter. And it will create our blank template. Just quit out of DNA Web and start it back up again. Just due to a bug at the minute that's in the DNA Web, I'll fix the next few days. And now when you restart, because there's a blank template in there, it will automatically spin up a website for us. Now go to the folder we just made, responsive, right click and open with code. And then we'll just drag this to the other side. And this will get us to our blank template. That's all we need now to have this website. We go to the index file, we can edit things. So we've got the environment set up and ready. So that's how nice and easy it is if we use the DNA Web engine to do that. What this video is about though is explaining, really demystifying what responsive design is, and trying to take the scare factor off that many people feel. It's a scary thing. So a responsive design, if you look at say my website and you drag out and you've got these three blocks here, and you've got a menu up here. And as we drag down, say we're on a tablet now, you can see this jumps to all three in a line. And you drag more, you go to mobile, and you'll see the menu changes from being a top menu to being a side menu. And like the buttons, you go even further, and then these buttons become singles. So this is effectively how my website will look on a mobile phone, which looks nice and clean. And then you drag the same website out and it looks, different. So all this is, again, nothing's ever that complicated. So I'm going to make this video just about, we're not going to do anything clean or organized or, commented. I want to just keep this video very specific to what I'm trying to show you. And basically that's just how simple responsive web design is. And it boils down to, in effect, one single thing in CSS. And that's just media queries. So we've got this title page here with now nothing in because I've removed it from there. And we are going to make kind of a mock-up of, say, this header and maybe 3 blocks here, just to show you how to make something responsive. And then once you know this foundation, the rest is all built on that exact same principle. There's nothing different. So we'll go to our index page here. And we'll first create some HTML. So a div is basically an element in the HTML that's kind of just a generic block display item. It's just if you want to create a HTML element purely for styling in CSS. There's no real meaning to it. It's purely going to be used as a styling element. So in web design, this whole layout, if we drag right out, you can see these sides go blank. There's nothing at either side. The grid's contained within this area, if you will. The whole website will never go any bigger. So even if I zoomed right out, this website's got this 1,000 pixel, roughly 1,000 pixel sort of area here. But then the background spans right the way across. So what I usually do is this background that's the full width of the page regardless, I usually call it a container. And then the thing that wraps your website up into, this grid of this specific size, I tend to call the wrapper because it wraps the grid. So in the HTML, we'll start with a div and we'll call the top one container. And we'll do another div inside that's then called the wrapper. And also this container, because we'll do a container not just for the whole site, we do it in blocks so that we can have different color backgrounds. And we've got a blue background, then a dark, then a blue. So in order to separate them, you do this container here will only be for this blue area. So as well as it having the container class, we'll add a class for header. I'll add a class for header, and then we'll style that to like blue. The wrapper will then limit the width to a maximum width. And then because we will be moving to a grid system, so this is a grid here with 3 columns, if you will, we'd have inside the wrapper then finally we'd have our parent grid that then hosts it. And this is usually what every area of your, or every like kind of section of your website will typically look like when you're doing a responsive design. You'll have the container, so you can style the background. You'll have the wrapper that wraps it to the maximum width. Then you'll have the grid, which will now host these responsive columns. And all this will make sense the more we go. So you don't have to, understand it fully at this point, because you will be using it actively after this video, and you'll get a lot more used to it. So we'll make one more, and we'll call this col for columns. This is the first column, and this here is going to just be one column because it's the full width of the page. So these 2 bits will be in, well, this whole blue area is just going to be one column in this case. This one's 3, but this one's just 1. So this column we want to also center. And these things don't exist yet. These are just names I'm making up. We've got to apply styles to these yet. So these are just purely, CSS class names that we'll add styles to. So we'll make the HTML structure first, then we'll style based on that. So we have the column, and inside that column then we will put the header. So we'll just say AngelSix for this header here. And then we'll just put a paragraph with some text. I develop software and hardware. If we save this right now, you can see it's just a plain old site with no styling. We're just making the HTML first. So we've got the column there, which is the full width one. We've got the content going in, and then below that we have these 2 buttons, if you will. And they're not buttons, they're just links that have been styled to look similar to buttons. So again, that will be basically a, what we'll put here, we'll do a div class, because what we want here actually is these 2 buttons will be in a grid, and then there's 2 columns, because when we resize to smaller, those 2 columns go from, to 1 column and to full width and things. So we typically style this inside a grid again. So you can have an inner grid, it makes no difference. So you'd have, say, a grid there, and then you would have a column. This one we'd want to be half width, so we'll just make a class called half. And initially at this size, because you'd have half of the grid, if you will, of the column, as you can see here, is half of the website. So this button's actually right aligned in the column. And the same for this one, this is left aligned. So it's kind of full width. And if we remove those right and left classes, then you'd see they basically, go like that. And then you could remove the, we go inside here. Where are we? One whole, one half. This we'd want to maybe just specify the width as 100%, sort of thing like that. And that's what it would look like otherwise, and that's what it looks like when you start, getting it responsive and going down the size. So for ours, it'll initially start as a column, it'll be half the width, and we'd want to align it to the right for this one. And then here, we just have tell me more. We're not going to bother making it a link or anything, because again, that's not really the point of what we're trying to show off here. So then we'll copy and paste the column. We'll have another one that's half that aligns to the left. And this one will say, contact me. And that then will form this whole blue area. So we now have, technically the whole blue area, we just haven't styled anything. And then for these three, I'm not going to bother making all those in any kind of detail. What I'll do is simply copy the whole container again, paste the container, the tabs are all messed up on this. Yeah, Visual Studio Code isn't doing a great job of doing the tabs. I'll have to mess with that another time to get these tabs to improve. Seems to be putting huge tabs, like 8 space tabs instead of spaces in. So basically copy and pasted that container now for these 3 here. It's not going to be the header anymore. We'll just simply have a container with no specific style. We'll have the wrapper to then constrain it within the size. We'll have the grid. And then we'll have just quite simply 3 columns. So just delete all that. And we'll just have 3 columns in here. Or let's put 4 in, doesn't really matter. We'll put 3 in. So we'll call this content A, B, and C. And there's nothing in there. We simply made the, well, let's put something in there so you can see. So we'll just say content A, content B, content C. And then what we'll do is style these 3 columns to be 33%, and then you know, with different sizes. Or let's put 4 in, just make it slightly different. Why not? So now we have the exact same HTML of how I would design this part of the page, and we'll now make it responsive. So first we'll style it in general because it's got no style whatsoever. So let's open up the SAS file for the style. Let's first change this background to black and the foreground, which is color, to white so it doesn't hurt your eyes so much. And let's just make the font a little bit nicer. Not much, but let's make it sans serif so it's a bit rounded. We also have to, the body, as part of what we'll do in the fabric template that we'll use next, is normalization to get rid of all differences in browsers. So one that's just going to show up here is going to be the body having a margin. So I'll just remove that margin for now. And we'll also clear all headers and paragraphs from having no margins. And we'll have a line height of 1.3. So all this is doing is normalizing the elements. So by default, the headers will have margins, and it won't look nice when you align things. So this is just normalization on a very basic level, but we'll cover that in the next video. So we just normalized a few things. Then we have in the HTML, we've got the containers, which I mentioned are simply the wrappers around this whole area. Now, when you've got the container and you shrink down and you start getting where your container is smaller than the wrapper, so as you scroll down here and then right about there, just when you hit it and it's changing, now technically the wrapper is butt up against the edge of the screen. So if we were to, well, let's just keep going so you can visually see it, and then I'll add the wrapper, the container, next. So let's just do the wrapper first and make a class.wrapper. So that'll target anything with a wrapper class, which it's got. We'll just make margin left auto and margin right auto. And what that does is basically expand the left and right margin equally, and centralize the elements if they have a width. And then we'll specify the max width, let's say just, 1,000 pixels. And this should, let's have a look. Wrapper. Yeah, so we've got the max width. Are we already? Yeah, so that should actually be centralized. There we go. So let's give this a background color just to see. Just for now, background equals blue. And you can see there's our wrapper that we're talking about that now stays central to the document, but it'll expand up to 1,000 pixels. So there's kind of your website's centerpiece. That is, this line here that you can't see. There's no hard defined line here, but that's the outline of the site. In fact, I can probably cause this to show up here nice and easily with just add a background to the wrapper of red. So you can see in the my website, here's the outline of the website. There's the wrappers around it. So we've got the wrapper. This is now your max width of your website. And as I was mentioning just which wanted to show first, now if you close your website, below that, any content that's left aligned or at the edge is right on the edge of the design. So what you'd usually do in your main container class is also add some padding. So let's just add, say, 24 pixels all around. And that kind of gives it a bit of padding away from the edge. So when it's reduced, you're not hitting the very edge of the screen. So it looks nicer. We'll just keep this. We'll remember this background for the moment. Just make it a little bit less in your face. We'll just do a border. Do something like that. So it's a bit less, intrusive. So you can visually see for now the wrapper. Now this header we put here, the container header, we want to be blue. So it at least kind of looks like this blue header. So what we'll do in the style is you can either do it inside a container or you can not care whether it's in a container or not and simply style the header. Makes no difference. In this one we will have a background of blue. And that now has made the background of that header blue. The next thing we can do is some simple style. So one of the things we placed on here on the call, it can go anywhere really, anywhere in this entire stack, as we were centralizing, this information, this writing. So if we just add a style called center, and we just do text align center and save, you can see now this is centralized. Next thing on here, let's at least now make a little grid for these tell me more and contact buttons. So for a grid, we'll do .grid for the style, because these are in a grid, these are going to be in a grid, and that's what we name them here. And again, this whole thing about a grid layout and columns and responsive design, I've made a nice advanced system already, which is what I use in here, that we'll use in the next video. So this one, I'm just proving the key principles of what happens. You don't need to, know the whole inner workings. You certainly can. There's the source is open. You can take a look whenever, but you just need to understand the basic principles because, like I said, the responsive side of it is very, very simple. So the grid system I've made has a grid which contains the elements, and then each element, each column inside there is going to be, these items. And the way I do it is I'll split it up by widths and percentages. So if we did a column inside here, the standard column, we do a width is 100%, so it's the full width, which it is by default anyway. And then let's have a look at where we've done half here. So we've done half and half for these two buttons. So if we did a column that has a class as well called half, we'd instead set the width to 50%. And you can't see here because it's still not aligned, but in fact it hasn't even. Oh, I'll put a dot and half. Oh no, I think that's it. Yeah, and I'll put a colon and dot half. And you can see now these elements are 50% width, but they're not quite. They're not quite in line. You want them, next to each other for a column. So to fix those few little issues of why that isn't, one, we want the columns divs by default are block. So all divs that you write, div here, by default they're always a block, which means they'll always take up a full line. So if we type div, or dib in this case, if we type div a, you'll see they always go on a new line. They always take up the full width of where they are. And because our columns want to be side by side, until they filled up the width, we basically changed the display style to inline block. And now these have shifted, but they still haven't gone one on top of the other. And that's because when something goes to an inline block, it becomes similar to text. So you've got white space to consider. So in the HTML, because we have this is now classed as an inline element, it's no different than typing this text to I develop software. So the gap from here to here, you've got white space. So if we were to remove that white space and save, you can see they've now gone side by side. They've now, gone 50%, 50% perfectly, filling up the 100%. But as soon as you add effectively this gap between them, then what you're dealing with here, the reason it's overflowing still, is because you've got the white space adding to that value. So to fix that little white space, a nice little trick I figured out was in the grid, so the container itself, change the font size to 0. And that will remove all white space. And then inside the columns in the grid, we reset the font size back to the default, which would be 16 pixels in this case. And now we've fixed that, and we have a layout that's now got two things 50%. And if we did, again, let's just put a visual border on here in red, just so you can see the outlines. That is also going to screw up the layout now because the border has got 1 pixel around it. So to fix that one, we would want to, well, for one, we wouldn't have to do that. We could always just apply it to the next inner item. But we might be able to fix it with just, what is it, border, box sizing, is it? Yeah, box sizing, border box might fix this. There we go. So this box sizing basically says the width that we're setting, 50% or 100%, should include the border and the padding. And because we added a border, then it also spaced out. So you can see basically the way that you get columns in the CSS. There's multiple ways, but the way I made up was basically a bunch of columns that become inline blocks. So they go like text, they just flow until they fill up. And then I basically set that percentage to whatever value I want. So 50-50 means that you get two perfectly separated columns. So moving on from that, let's make the button style. So just down here, we'll just do a button style to at least style these two. I think that's what we called them. Call half right. Oh, I didn't give them any style. Do button. Or rather, let's wrap these in a div with a class of button for now. So now they've got a div around them with a class called button. For the button style, let's just do, we've got the color already. Let's just put a border around them, 1 pixel solid, white, border radius, 5 pixels, padding 20 pixels, nice big padding, margin 5 pixels around it. And there we go, we have two big buttons. And then all we did, we mentioned when they go like that when it's smaller, but when it's bigger, they just kind of go a line left and right. So the trick to that is we'll simply add this right and left style so that the left align and right align. So just do dot left, text align left, dot right is text align right. And then we get this. Maybe this wants to be display inline block as well. And there we go. So that's kind of the mock-up outline that's the same. None of this is responsive yet, but we'll get there as soon as we've done this. So now let's just tweak these contents. So we want all 4 of these contents to be 25% width, so they take up 1 row in this example here. I know we've got 3 in the website, but let's just do 4 for this design. So we have half there. Let's do now and dot content A and then B, C, D. So content A, A, B, C and D. For all of them, let's just do a width of 25%. And then they all go in line. Let's chuck a center on that as well, so that all the text aligns central. Put a bit of padding in. There we go. And then we'll just color the backgrounds of each of them differently. So we'll do content A, background red, and then B, C, D, red, green, blue, yellow. And you can see now, I think we can get rid of this dotted border now. We can quite clearly see where the columns are for now. Same with the blue dotted one. Let's get rid of that around the grids. And there's our grid, if you will. Now nothing responds, but you can see we have, these 4 boxes are kind of just simulating these things here. So now it's time to make it responsive, and this is where, like I say, it's very surprisingly incredibly simple. It's 1 line of code in this case. So we're going to say, here's the full size site, and when we get to here, which we'll just say is, I don't know, less than 900 pixels or 800 pixels, whatever. That's the breakpoint of when we decide to change the style of the site. So we're going to go to about here. We're going to make these boxes, so these ones, we'll make ours go 50%, so we fit 2 on a line instead of all of them down. So this is the bit now that makes the site responsive. And again, like I say, it couldn't be any easier. So whenever we've styled it, so we've made the width here this size inside a column. So inside the column style, we want to change this style when the size of the page is different. So in order to do that, we can put it right below if you like, you can put it wherever. All you need to type is @media, which basically means a media query. Only screen, which you can omit, but you don't want it happening when you're printing, or presumably you might, but I only like the responsiveness happening on a screen. If you're going to then print something, I don't want it doing that. So I just put media, only screen, and then and now we want a specific breakpoint, if you will. So we open and close brackets, and then in here is where you specify what should happen when. So if we want to make a style that happens whenever the website is less than 900 pixels, you put max width, colon 900 pixels. And what this means is anything inside of this group here will only exist or only execute while, if I could spell width, while the width is less than 900 or less than and equal to. So then all we'll do now is copy this into here. Don't need to bother changing the padding. And when it's less than that size, we're going to change the width to 50%. And that's it. So now when we reduce this, you can see we now have a responsive website. So there's 4 columns, there's 2 columns, 4, 2, 4, 2. And this can be your, I guess, below desktop responsive style or responsive styles. And this line alone really makes your site responsive. And it's as simple as anything inside of this will only exist and run when the size is this. So all you'll be doing is restyling your site based on the size of the browser. So if we add another one, we'll say below tablet. And for that, we'll go below 600. And when it's below 600, we want to go full width. So now we've got full size page, tablet or laptop, and then tablet and mobile. And that really is all there is to responsive design. I mean, there's nothing else. It's just a combination of using those tricks. So let's do these two buttons, which are a bit more complicated. And what we've done there is we've aligned the text left and right and made the element itself display inline, which was, where did we do that? Let's have a look. We added the class here, so half left, right, column half. We didn't really add any name to it, so we'll say, I don't know, but well, in fact, for we just need to give it a name, don't we? Say header button. Just give it any kind of class. So now for the header button, we want to go into here, so below desktop size, and dot header button. And then when we're below a certain size, what's wrong with that? Does not use empty rule sets. Oh, I think I just need to type something. So for that, we'll then set the the column's already correct at this point. No, so not the, we don't want to apply it to that bit. We want to apply it to the button. Oh, so we have a button anyway. We've got a class called button. So in fact, we can just say, not and, because it can be within the column, the style button here. We want the style then to go width 100%. And now if we go down, oh, that didn't quite work. Inspect. What have we got here? Width 100%. So let's uncheck that a moment. We have here text align. We would remove and display inline block. This bit. Right, this is the display inline block. So we just have to remove the display inline block and don't bother with that width. So all we have to do there basically then is remove the inline block and the text align left and right. So we can force the text align center. So let's do text align center instead. That does that. And display inline block becomes display block. So there we go. So now we have the buttons that then do that, which is what they do on my actual site. So the breakpoints are a bit different, but it's about there. So they go to that, which is still two columns, but we've simply styled the inner content a bit different, so they don't float, they go full width. And then once they get right to the bottom part, the smaller design, we copy this into here. And then at that point, we want, in fact, not the button at that point. We then want the columns. So in this case, we've called it half. So we can just use that name for now. When we're that size, half actually wants to be 100%. So now we go from there to there to there. And you can see, as I was saying, that really is all there is to responsive design. So I didn't want to complicate the issue by separating all this into multiple files and commenting everything. And we'll certainly do that now going forward because you should keep everything clean. But just to prove the absolute basics without anything getting in the way and no complications, this really is all there is to the responsive design. So everything from this point onwards, whatever you look at that's responding, whether it's animating or not, or whether it looks more complicated. This is all a website does when it becomes responsive and it works on mobiles and browsers and looks different. It's purely just media queries. There might be some JavaScript involved as well for effects, but it really is this simple. So hopefully this will have kind of demystified responsive design and made you feel a lot more confident that now you can look at a website and, like I say, look at mine and effectively know how it's done and what's happening, to all of a sudden look nice on a mobile and then look completely different, or appear to look completely different on a full screen. So again, any comments, let me know. In the next video, we're going to now take this real basic example, which all you have to really be bothered about is the columns and the grids, how I kind of made this happen, how I made the widths work. And then when we introduce the fabric template that now has a full-blown grid and column system that we can make use of, all that's happening in the background is this. Other than this basically being it, I just tidy it up, make it cleaner, and give you helpful classes to be able to, style it easier. But behind the scenes, there's nothing else different. So, you don't need to worry about not understanding the template that we'll use. Any comments or questions, let me know, and I'll get another video out shortly.